My father looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You are not my son anymore." Not because I did something wrong, because my rank came back as F1 letter, 1 result. And just like that, 18 years meant absolutely nothing. In this world, everyone gets evaluated at 18. 1 test, 1 number. That number decides your entire life. Going forward, S-rank hunters become legends. A rank live comfortably. B and C grind dungeons for decent pay. F-rank means go home. My name is Kael, 18 years old, and apparently the single biggest disappointment this family has ever produced. My brother Marcus got S-rank at 17. My father is a decorated rank veteran. My mother cried when she heard my result. Not the proud kind of crying. The kind where someone realizes the future they imagined is just gone and there is nothing left to say. I stood in that evaluation room holding my certificate and genuinely considered whether staring at it long enough would change it. It did not, so I just stood there in that room, holding my F, while everyone around me quietly looked at the floor. The evaluators use a resonance crystal. It reads your mana signature and outputs a rank. Simple system. Efficient, brutal. What the crystal cannot read is whether your ability is something it even knows how to measure. Mine was not. I found that out on the walk home. Cutting through the market, head down. Certificate stuffed in my jacket. When I heard it, a voice. Low, tired, coming from the alley on my left. Please, just leave me alone. I heard every word of it perfectly clearly. I looked over. A creature chained outside a beast trade shop is small, gray-furred, about the size of a large cat. Dungeon creature, obviously captured, put up for sale, standard market site. Nothing unusual about any of that. What was unusual? I understood it. Not like understanding a dog whining. I understood the actual words. Every single one. Fully. Completely. Like it had leaned over and spoken each word directly into my brain in plain, simple language I could not misread. I stood in the middle of the busy market and had one clear thought. Okay. So that is happening. That is a thing that is happening. My first reaction was not wonder, not excitement, not some dramatic realization that I had discovered a rare and hidden gift. My first thought was, I absolutely cannot tell anyone about this. Not now. Not given everything that just happened today. I had just been ranked F. My family was looking at me like a stranger. Showing up with monster communication powers would make everything worse. So I kept walking. But I stopped at that alley first. The creature looked back at me. Yellow eyes, very steady. The eyes of something that had seen enough to stop being surprised by much. You can hear me, it said. Not a question, just a flat statement, like it was confirming a data point. Apparently, I said, and I genuinely had nothing better than that. First human in about 400 years, it said. You should know that going in. Then it went quiet. I did not know what to do with that information, so I nodded like that was reasonable, and I went home. My father sat me down that evening, still in his hunter gear. He had not changed after his shift. He wanted this conversation immediately. That told me everything about where his head was. He had already made some decisions before he walked in the door. You will have to find civilian work, he said. No guild will take an F rank. No dungeon crew wants a liability on the roster. I know, I said. He waited like he expected more. I did not give him more. Your brother has already been contacted by 3 S-rank guilds, he said. He will be signing before the end of the month. I said nothing to that. What was there to say? He looked at me for a long time. Not with anger. Worse than anger. With nothing. Like he was already grieving something still alive. 3 months, he said. Find work. Support yourself. After that, you handle your own situation. He stood up and left. My mother did not come out of the kitchen. Marcus had his door open and his guild brochures on the floor and did not look up once. I went to my room, sat on my bed, thought about a small gray creature with yellow eyes telling me I was the first in for centuries. Then I thought, alright, let us actually figure out what that means. I went back to the market the next morning. The creature was still there, still chained, still watching the street like it was running calculations. I crouched down in front of it. For 100 years, I said, I need you to explain that to me from the beginning. It looked at me. Your ability is called Primordial Tongue. It said, it is older than the dungeon system, older than the ranking crystals, older than most of the current infrastructure, and it ranked F because the crystal did not recognize it. I said, it looked at me with those flat yellow eyes. The crystals were designed to measure combat output, it said. Mana volume, physical enhancement, elemental affinity. Yours produces none of those. So what does mine produce? I said, It took a small breath, like it was preparing to explain something obvious to someone slow. Information, it said. Perfect information. In real time. About anything a dungeon creature knows. The crystal read that as nothing. I stared at it. Just sat there in front of the beast shop and let it land properly. Information. That was my rank. That was my F. What kind of information exactly? I said. Every dungeon creature senses things humans cannot. It said. Monoccurrence. Spatial distortions. Hidden chambers. Boss weaknesses. Resource locations. We share all of it automatically. It said. Like breathing. Involuntary. And no human has ever been able to receive any of it. Until right now. I bought it. I did not have much money. Part-time savings from school. Not a lot. The shop owner looked at me with pity I did not want. The tag on the cage said F-grade dungeon beast. I noticed that. Paid anyway. There was a joke in there, and I was too tired to make it. I named it Ash. It accepted this the way something accepts a minor inconvenience it has decided is not worth addressing. Ash had been in that shop for 8 months. Captured from a mid-tier dungeon. Too small to bother killing. Too plain to interest collectors. 8 months surrounded by other captured creatures from dozens of different dungeons. 8 months of a network constantly feeding it data. Over 3 days in my room. Ash explained how it all worked. Dungeon creatures are not animals. They are not mindless. They are fully aware. They operate on instinct in combat because survival activates a different layer. But underneath that, they think, they remember, they prefer things, and they are talking to each other constantly. Every creature that has been near another has exchanged information about its dungeon, automatically, which meant Ash's 8 months in a market surrounded by creatures from dozens of different active dungeons had absorbed an extraordinary amount of data. You have a map, I said slowly, of all of them, a real-time, continuously updated map of over 40 active dungeons within reach. More than a map, Ash said. I can still receive. The creatures inside those dungeons are still broadcasting. This updates continuously. I thought about my father's deadline. I thought about Marcus and his brochures. I thought about the crystal that decided I was nothing. Okay, I said, here is what we are going to do. The problem was obvious. I could not fight. F rank meant 0 combat ability. Inside a dungeon, I would lose. Every time. So I could not be a hunter. But I did not need to be. Information brokers existed. People who sold dungeon intelligence to guilds. They got their data from scouts, leaked reports, dungeon survivors. It was always incomplete, always outdated, always expensive. Because real, reliable dungeon intelligence was almost impossible to get. And I had perfect real-time intelligence on 40+ dungeons. Ash gave me my first target. Dungeon 3 kilometers north. It said, Tier 2. 3 guilds tried to clear it. None reached the boss chamber. Why not? I said. They all use the main entrance. Ash said. There is a secondary spatial fold 40 meters below the third corridor junction. No one knows it exists. It bypasses the entire trap network. It said. Leads directly to the pre-boss chamber. A rich spine wolf has used it as a den for 11 months. I sent an anonymous tip to a mid-tier guild called Iron Path. Coordinates. Exact depth. 1 line about the fold. No name. No signature, nothing. 3 days later, Iron Path cleared the dungeon. First clear in its 6-month active period. The announcement went up the next morning. I sent a second message the next morning. It said, you are welcome. And it included a price list for future intelligence deliveries. Their response came back in 4 hours. They wanted to meet. I said no. Everything in writing. Payment first. No names. No exceptions. They pushed back. Names and faces give control. I was removing all of it deliberately. They did not like that. I held the line. 2 more days of back and forth. But Iron Path had just cleared a dungeon that had beaten them twice before. They agreed. The first paid delivery was a Tier 3 dungeon. Boss behavior, resource locations, a critical entry weakness nobody had found. Payment arrived. I sent the file. Ash and I sat in my room and looked at the number in my account. This is real. I said. I told you. Ash said. There is a difference, I said, between someone telling you something and watching it actually happen in front of you. Ash made the specific sound I had come to understand meant something approximately equivalent to a sigh, and looked away. The 3 months passed. My father brought it up at dinner on the exact date he had specified. He was very precise about things like that. Have you found work? He said. My mother looked up. Even Marcus looked up, which was notable because Marcus had stopped seeing me as a person. Information consulting. I said, dungeon intelligence, to clients currently, 3rd in negotiation, income is consistent. Silence. My father looked at me with the expression of someone whose framework is not large enough. for what they are hearing. You are Frank, he said. How are you? He stopped, could not quite finish the sentence. I have a methodology, I said. I cover my own expenses. I am fine. And I looked right back at him and did not blink. He looked at me for a long time after that, searching for the lie, the trick, the thing that made this fit the box he had built for Frank. He did not find it, because the box was wrong. Fine, he said quietly, and went back to eating. My mother let out a breath. Under the table, Ash was sitting on my feet. Pressure that meant, well done. I pressed back slightly. Thanks, I thought. Couldn't have done this without you. The yellow eyes blinked once from below the table. Obviously, Ash did not say out loud, but it was nice of you to acknowledge it. Van Thorn found me. I did not go to them. They were not a mid-tier operation. One of the 6 major guilds in the entire region. A rank minimum entry. 3 S-rank hunters on permanent roster. Annual revenue that would make most people go quiet. Their message skipped everything Iron Path had done. No small talk. No negotiating. Direct. We know you are a single source. We know your information is accurate. We want exclusive access. Name your price. I did not answer immediately. I asked one question first. Tell me what you know about the Tier 6 dungeon east of the city. Their response came back in under an hour. 3 words. How do you know? I said. Same way I know everything else. Answer the question first and we will talk about price. They sent their internal assessment file. Full access. Which told me 2 things. They were genuinely scared and they had decided secrecy was not going to work on me. The file confirmed what Ash had been picking up. Pressure buildup. Population inside becoming increasingly agitated. Break risk climbing weekly. A dungeon break meant creatures flooding out uncontrolled into populated areas. The last major break in this region destroyed an entire city district. Over 200 people gone. What the file did not contain was any information about what was actually at the bottom of that dungeon, because nobody had made it back from the bottom. I closed the file, looked at Ash. How long do you need to get me something real on this one? It considered the question carefully. 3 days, Ash said. Maybe 4. There are creatures near the boundary. I will reach them. Then it curled up on my bed and went to sleep. I sat at my desk and stared at Van Thorn's message. And I thought about my father 3 months ago telling me I had 3 months. I thought about Marcus and the brochure spread across his floor while I walked past, and he did not look up. Not once, not even once. I thought about a resonance crystal looking at the single most valuable intelligence ability in the history of dungeon hunting and printing F. I thought about what it meant that I was sitting in a small room with a creature that could reach into 40 active dungeons simultaneously. F-rank. Sure. Call it whatever you want. 60 days until a possible dungeon break. Something ancient at the bottom that even the creatures inside avoid. And I am the only one who can actually ask what it is. Let us see how this goes. If you were Van Thorn's guild master, would you sign Kael on the spot or investigate him first? Drop your answer below. Ash came back on day 3. Not with words, with a sound low resonant. Something between a growl and a frequency I felt in my teeth. I had learned to read those sounds by then. This one meant I found something, and I do not entirely like what I found. I closed my laptop, sat on the floor so we were at eye level. Tell me, I said. Ash was quiet for a moment longer than usual. There is a creature at the boundary of the Tier 6. It said, old. Very old. It has been in the dungeon longer than the dungeon itself has existed. I stayed very still. How is that possible? I said. Because the dungeon formed around it, Ash said. It was not captured. The spatial collapse happened while it was already there. It got enclosed. Dungeons formed from spatial collapses, points where dimensional pressure cracked the surface of the world and created a contained pocket of altered space. What was not standard knowledge was that something could already be sitting in a location when the collapse happened. That was not in any guild literature I had read. What is it? I said. Ash took another long pause, the kind that meant it was choosing words carefully. The creature near the boundary calls it the first sleeper. It said. That is a name. I said. Not an answer. It is the only answer available, Ash said. The boundary creature has never been inside the deeper chambers. No creature has. The ones who tried did not come back. I thought about the Van Thorn teams. None returned from below the 3rd floor. I sat with that information and felt it settle in a way that was not comfortable. Is it hostile? I said. Unknown. Ash said. It has not moved in what the boundary creature estimates as several hundred years. It sleeps. The agitation in the dungeon is not coming from it, Ash continued. It is coming from the population reacting to something it is doing in its sleep. What is it doing in its sleep? I said. Dreaming, Ash said. and whatever it dreams is affecting the spatial fabric of the dungeon itself. Walls shift, corridors disappear, new ones appear. The pressure buildup is a side effect of the structural instability. It said, the dungeon is not full. It is being rewritten from the inside by something that does not know it is doing it. I sat with that, then said, so the break risk is not overflow. It is because something ancient is redesigning the dungeon architecture and its sleep. Yes, Ash said, and if it wakes up, I said. Ash looked at me with those flat yellow eyes. I do not know. It said, the boundary creature does not know. Nobody knows. I wrote the report that night, everything, the first sleeper, the dreaming, the structural rewriting, the timeline, the actual cause of the break risk. Then I stopped before sending it, because sitting there at 2 in the morning, I realized something important. This information was worth more than an exclusive contract with Van Thorn. This was worth more than anything a single guild could offer me. If a tier 6 dungeon was about to break because something ancient was having a bad dream, that was not a guild problem. That was a city problem. I needed to think carefully about who I gave this to and what I asked for in return. I closed the draft and went to sleep. In the morning, I had approximately 4 minutes to think before Van Thorn sent a follow-up message. It said, we know you found something. Our analysts have been monitoring the dungeon. The structural anomaly spiked 3 days ago when you started asking. We are raising our offer significantly. I read it twice, then looked at Ash. They have someone watching the perimeter. I said, obviously. Ash said, it is a tier 6 with break risk. Of course they are watching it, because you asking caused me to reach further into the boundary network. The creatures inside reacted, which registered as behavioral changes visible from outside. Because you asking caused me to reach further into the boundary network, Ash said. The creatures inside reacted, which registered as behavioral changes visible from the outside. So they know I know something. They just do not know what. Then it went back to the window with the expression of something done talking. Correct? Ash said. Then it went back to looking out the window with the expression of something that had said everything it needed to say. I wrote back to Van Thorn, not with a price, with questions. What is your break protocol? What resources do you have? What requires government clearance? Their response took 2 hours, longer than usual. They were consulting internally, and at the end was a name. Director Sona Vale. Director Sona Vale, head of crisis response for the Regional Dungeon Authority. With a note, she is willing to speak with you directly if your information warrants it. I stared at that name for a while. The Dungeon Authority was not a guild. It was the government body that oversaw all dungeon activity in the region. Hunting licenses, break protocols, emergency evacuations, resources and authority no single guild had access to. Van Thorn had escalated beyond themselves, which meant they had looked at the anomaly data and decided they needed backup, which meant whatever was happening in the dungeon was worse than even their internal assessment indicated. I wrote back one line, set up the meeting. Director Sona Vale was younger than I expected, mid-30s, short hair, the composed expression of someone who managed situations with no good options for a living. She looked at me when I walked in and her expression did not change at all. She had been briefed. F-rank teenager, unknown methodology, accurate intelligence on multiple dungeons. She had already decided Summith. She asked about methodology. I said I cannot disclose the method, but I can prove it. I will give you 3 predictions about the dungeon's internal changes over the next 48 hours. If the predictions are accurate, we proceed on the basis that the information is reliable. She wrote them down without reacting to any of them. Come back in 48 hours, she said. I did. All 3 predictions were accurate. Eastern Corridor cluster collapsed at R31. The new spatial fold opened at R44. Population migration confirmed at R47. Director Vale was standing when I came in this time. That was different from the first visit. She did not waste any time. What do you know? She said. So I told her everything. The first sleeper, the dreaming, the spatial rewriting, the reason the pressure was building. All of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. How confident are you in this? She said. The source is direct. I said. Not interpreted. Not secondhand. Continuous contact with the dungeon boundary population for months. She absorbed that, set it aside, moved on. You have a dungeon creature as a source, she said. Not an accusation, just locking in a detail. Yes, I said. She set it aside and moved on, which told me she was genuinely practical in a way most people in her position were not. Conventional break protocols are inadequate for what you are describing, she said slowly. We would be dealing with a spatial anomaly source, not a population overflow. Yes, I said. She set it aside and moved on, what would actually address the root cause, she said. She was very practical about it. I had thought about this. Ash had thought about it. The boundary creature had been consulted. The first sleeper is asleep, I said. It does not know the dungeon is there. The dreaming is involuntary. Someone needs to communicate with it, I said. Let it know where it is. Give it the option to stop on its own. She looked at me. You are the only person who can do that, she said. Yes, I said. Outside the window, the city went about its business, entirely unaware that something ancient east of it was having dreams that were slowly tearing a hole in the world. You are effing, she said. Not as an insult, more like confirming a detail she found genuinely strange given everything else. The crystal measures combat output, I said. It does not measure this. She picked up her phone, made a brief call, set it down. 4-person team, she said. Crisis protocol. You enter with 3 top hunters. Your role is non-combative communication only. If the hunters determine the situation is too dangerous, you exit, she said. No arguments. The hunters will be told you are an intelligence specialist with a classified technique. Accurate enough. She slid a contract across the desk. The compensation was significant. Not as significant as what I had planned to ask for. But she had skipped the negotiation phase by being reasonable immediately. One more thing, I said. I slid a list across the desk. Materials. Specific ones. Things Ash needed. Things that existed only in government vaults or high-tier dungeon cores. She looked at the list. 2 of these are standard vault access, she said. The 3rd is restricted. The 3rd is what I need. I said. If the operation succeeds and the dungeon is stabilized, she said, the restricted material is yours. Said like a minor concession. I kept my face still and signed. I walked out of the authority building into afternoon sunlight and stood on the steps and just breathed for a moment. Then I went home and told Ash everything. Ash was quiet for a long time after, sitting on the windowsill, looking out at the street. You negotiated the materials, it said finally. Yes, I said, while also accepting a mission into a tier 6 dungeon with something ancient at the bottom. It said, where multiple training teams have already failed to return from the lower floors. Yes, I said. It looked at me with those yellow eyes, very flat, very steady. You are aware, it said, that I am the one who will actually be doing the communicating. We are a team, I said. This has always been a team operation. You reach the network. I understand what comes back. Neither works without the other. Ash turned back to the window. The hunters they assign will be a problem, it said. People at that level do not handle uncontrollable variables well. We are an uncontrollable variable. I will handle it, I said. How? Ash said. I thought about it for a moment. By being right about everything before they have time to doubt me, I said. Ash made the sound that meant approximately. That is either a very good plan or a very stupid one, and we will only know which in retrospect. I chose to interpret it as encouragement. The team briefing was 2 days later. Director Vell's conference room. 3 hunters already seated when I walked in. The woman on the left was a dash-rank dot older. The settled stillness of someone who had survived things that should have killed her. Her name was Ren. She looked at me when I walked in and went carefully neutral. Professional suspension of judgment until the evidence came in. The man in the center was also a dash-rank dot younger. Easy confidence that had not yet been seriously tested. His name was Dane. He glanced at my rank insignia when I sat down, F, then looked away very quickly, like he was being polite about what he had just seen. The 3rd hunter was in the back corner, arms crossed, looking at the wall dash rank. Her name was Lyrian, and she did not look at me at all when I came in. Director Vale ran the briefing. The dungeon. Break risk timeline. Structural anomalies. Mission objective. Enter. Reach the lower floors. Stabilize the source of the instability. My role. Intelligence specialist. Classified technique. Root calls were mine. Combat authority was theirs. Defer to my approach calls. Retain full authority on engagement decisions. Dane's jaw moved slightly when she said defer to my root calls. He controlled it fast, but it moved. Ren just nodded. Ren was going to be fine. Lyrian still had not looked at me. When Vale left, Dane spoke immediately. I want to understand the methodology. In plain language, how are you getting real-time dungeon information? I cannot disclose the specific technique, I said. What I can tell you is that the 3 predictions I gave Director Vale were accurate to within 2 hours on timing and exact on location. You have the data. That does not tell me what the technique is, he said. No, I said. It does not. He looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us moved. He looked at me, under the table, in my bag, Ash was completely still and completely silent in a way that meant it was paying very close attention to everything. If your calls put us in danger because the information is wrong, Dean started. I cut in before he could finish framing it as a threat. Then we exit, I said. That is the protocol. Your combat authority is absolute. If you decide we leave, we leave. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to evaluate the results. Rin spoke for the first time. Low voice. The kind that had stopped needing to work hard to be heard. Let the results speak. First bad call. We reassess. She said it like it was already settled. Dane looked at her, then at me, then nodded once. Tight. He had not loved the arrangement. He had accepted it. That was enough for now. I looked at Lyrian. She was looking at my bag, specifically at the slight movement where Ash had shifted position. She had remarkable eyes. There is something in your bag, she said. Yes, I said. What? She said. My source. I said. She looked at me for a long moment. She looked at me then finally. Eyes that were an unusual light gray, almost silver. The kind of eyes that had adapted to dungeon lighting over a long career. A dungeon creature, she said. Still not a question. She had already worked it out from something. Yes, I said. Something moved behind those silver eyes. Not surprise. Recalibration. Primordial tongue, she said, very quietly, like confirming something she had half expected. I went very still. There is a reference in the S-Rank restricted archive, she said. Pre-system records. Most people think it is mythology. How long have you had it? She said. Since birth. I said. I did not know what it was until recently. She absorbed it without comment. She looked at me for a long moment, then looked at my bag, then turned to face the front of the room and said, I take point on entry. Dane, rear guard. Ren, lateral. Intelligence specialist stays center. She said intelligence specialist the way someone accepts a technical term. They have decided to stop debating. Do not get in our way and do not lie to us. That is my only condition. Agreed, I said. And that was that. She turned to face the front of the room like the matter was settled. And as far as she was concerned it was. We entered the Tier 6 on a gray Tuesday morning. For people and one small creature in a bag that all three hunters had now technically acknowledged. And collectively decided not to comment on further. The main entrance had authority perimeter personnel, monitoring equipment, evacuation markers. Standard for a dungeon under active break watch. We signed in. We went in. The first floor was chaos compared to what the guild reports had described. The corridor geometry had shifted. Walls that should have been straight curved. Rooms that should have been accessible were sealed behind solid stone that had not been there before. The dungeon was actively rearranging itself around us. Left junction collapsed, I said. Ash was feeding me updates continuously. There is a passage 40 meters ahead on the right. Currently stable. It goes down. Lyrian looked at the sealed junction, looked where I had indicated the passage was, then moved right without another word. No hesitation at all. Dane was watching everything, waiting for the first error. I could feel it. The passage was exactly where I said. Going exactly down. Second floor, Ash said quietly from the bag. Migration has moved further. Floors 4 and 5 are almost empty. Population consolidated on 3. Floor 3 will be crowded. Floor 3 will be packed, I told the group. Floors 4 and 5 are nearly clear. We moved through 3 fast. What pushed the population up? Ren asked. Something below them making them uncomfortable, I said. Something they did not want to be near. Lyrian said nothing. She already knew. Floor 2 was quieter. The structural shifts had not fully reached it yet. We moved fast. The silence was easier to navigate than the chaos above had been. Floor 3 was not quiet. The creature population had consolidated exactly as Ash predicted. Packed tidy agitated, moving in patterns that had nothing to do with us. The creature population had consolidated exactly as Ash predicted. Packed tidy agitated, moving in patterns that had nothing to do with us. They were responding entirely to what was coming from below. Lyrian moved through them like water finding a path downhill. 11 minutes. Dane was impressive once he had something concrete in front of him. Rin held the sides with the efficiency of someone who had done this several hundred times before. I stayed center and called angles from Ash's continuous feed. I stayed center and called angles from Ash's feed and tried to be useful without being in the way. Mostly I succeeded. We reached the floor for entrance ahead of my estimated timeline. Floor 4 was almost silent. The emptiness was louder than the noise had been on 3. The dungeon architecture was actively wrong in ways that made the I want to slide away. Corridors bent at angles that did not make geometric sense. Rooms that felt larger inside than their entrances suggested. Shadows in places where the light source could not produce shadows. The dreaming is stronger here, Ash said very quietly. We are getting closer. Closer to what? Dane said. He had heard the sound from the bag. Updated information. I said. The spatial distortion increases as we go deeper. Stay close and do not move into any space I have not confirmed. He started to push back. Ren's hand touched his arm briefly. He stopped. The economy of the gesture told me everything about how this team actually worked. The architecture on floor 5 had stopped pretending. The space shifted as we moved through it. Not dangerously. Not yet. But visibly. Walls breathed. The floor had a quality underfoot that was not stone deeper older. Like touching something that had existed before the category of stone existed. And at the center of floor 5, where the structural anomaly readings had been highest, there was a door. Not a dungeon door. Not any door I had seen described in any report or any literature ever. It was made of something that was not stone and was not metal and was not any material that had a name. Dark in a way that was not about light. The darkness was in the material itself, not a function of the end. And it was warm. Not heat. Warmth. The way something living radiates warmth from inside itself. Old warmth. The kind that does not cool. All 4 of us stood in front of it and said nothing for a moment. The silence had a texture I had not encountered before. Then Ash climbed out of the bag entirely, walked forward on those small gray feet, sat directly in front of the door, and went completely still. Lyrian watched it. Something in her expression had shifted. Still composed, but different. Like a frequency she had always been able to hear, had just increased in volume. What is it doing? Dane said, very quietly. Listening, I said. And all 4 of us stood there and watched a small gray creature sit in silence before an impossible door. And then Ash made a sound. Not to me. Not in any language I could parse his words. A frequency that was resonant and deep and somehow both very small and very large at the same time. The door breathed, slowly once. The warmth in the material pulsed outward like a heartbeat. The spatial distortion around us stilled completely. Just for a moment, like something on the other side had noticed we were there and paused to consider the fact. Ash was silent for a long time after. Eyes closed. When they opened, it looked at me. It knows we are here, Ash said. It has been aware of us since floor 3. The air in the room did not change, but something in it did. Something underneath the air. Is it hostile? Lyrian said, very quietly. Her hand was not on her weapon. That was deliberate. Ash looked at her, then at me. It is curious, Ash said. It has not had a visitor in a very long time. It did not expect one. It is deciding what to do with us. I stepped forward, stood beside Ash in front of the door that was not a door, looked at the darkness that was warm and alive and several hundred years deep. Tell it why we are here, I said. Ash began to speak, and the door began to listen. And somewhere in the city east of us, the dungeon's pressure readings, which had been climbing weekly for months, flatlined. Just for a moment. The way breathing pauses when something wakes up and takes its first real look around. Then it rose again, slower this time. Different, not the pressure of a brick approaching. Something else entirely. Something that felt, if I had to name it, like attention. The first thing it said was not a greeting. It was a question. And the question came through Ash, translated piece by piece. The way something enormous passes through something small. It came through Ash, translated piece by piece. The way something enormous gets passed through something small. How long? Ash said, relaying it. It is asking how long it has been asleep. I looked at the door, at the warmth pulsing through the dark material in slow, ancient rhythms. Tell it we do not know exactly, I said. Estimates suggest several hundred years minimum. Ash relayed the pause. Long enough that Dane shifted his weight behind me. Then the door breathed again, slower this time. It says that it's consistent with what it remembers, Ash said. The last thing it remembers clearly is a forest. Where the forest was. It does not know. I thought about a spatial collapse. A dungeon forming around something that was already there. Something that went to sleep in an open forest and woke up enclosed inside a pocket dimension. Woke up, if this even counted as waking, inside a changed world, surrounded by creatures that could not speak to it and hunters that died trying to reach it. Tell it there is no forest anymore, I said. Tell it there is a city. Tell it the world has changed significantly. Ash relayed. Another pause. Then something happened that I did not expect. The door did not breathe. Instead, the warmth pulled inward sharply, like something flinching. It understands, Ash said quietly. It is processing. Behind me, Ren spoke low. The perimeter sensors just registered a pressure drop. Significant. Whatever you just said. It responded. I had not forgotten they were there. But in the gravity of that room, with what was on the other side of the door, the 3 hunters had gone very quiet. Other side of that impossible door, The three hunters had gone quiet in a way that told me they were watching something they did not have a framework for and were choosing to let it unfold. Even Dane had stopped looking for errors. He was just watching. Ask it why the dreaming affects the dungeon structure, I said to Ash. Ask it if it knows it is doing it. Ash relayed. The pause this time was different, longer. And when the door breathed again, the warmth was tinged with something I did not have a word for, but that Ash translated as, it did not know, Ash said. It was not aware there was a structure to affect. It thought it was still in the forest. It thought it was dreaming of the forest. The thing on the other side of the door had been dreaming of a forest that no longer existed for several hundred years. And the dreams had been tearing the dungeon apart. 100 years. And the dreams had been tearing the dungeon apart from the inside because it did not know the dungeon was there. I let that sit for a moment. Then, tell it what is actually around it now. Tell it about the dungeon. Tell it what has been happening to the structure. Ash began to relay. It took a while. The communication was not fast. Each exchange required Ash to find the frequency, translate the concept, wait for the response, translate back. While Ash spoke, I watched the door. The warmth shifted in patterns I was learning to read. Slow pulse, attention, fast pulse, surprise or discomfort, withdrawal, processing something difficult. The warmth withdrew deeply when Ash explained the structural collapse. The disappearing corridors, the creature population being displaced, the pressure building toward a potential break. It is distressed, Ash said quietly, not relaying, just observing. It did not intend any of this. I know, I said. Tell it that, Ash relayed. The warmth steadied after a moment, still deep but less withdrawn. Something like relief moving through it. It is asking what it can do, Ash said. It is asking how to stop the dreaming. I had not expected that to be the question. I had come in here prepared for negotiation, for resistance, for something I would have to argue into cooperation. Instead, it was simply asking what it could do to fix what it had accidentally broken. I looked at Ash. Ash looked at me. Can it stop the dreaming on command? I said. I am asking, Ash said. A longer exchange, back and forth. The warmth shifted several times through patterns I could not fully read yet. Then Ash was still. Not on command, Ash said. The dreaming is not voluntary. It is what happens when something of its nature goes dormant for too long. The dreams are the mind maintaining itself during the long sleep, so it cannot simply stop. I said. It can wake up, Ash said. The room was very quiet. What does that mean for the dungeon? I said. The dungeon formed around it while it slept, Ash said. The spatial collapse is anchored to its presence here. If it fully wakes and chooses to leave, the anchor dissolves. The dungeon collapses. Controlled collapse, Ren said from behind me. Her voice was steady. Not a break, controlled. The creatures inside would need to be evacuated first, but there would be no outward flooding. Yes, Ash said. How long does it need to fully wait? I said. Another exchange. The warmth pulsed in a specific pattern. 3 days, Ash said. It thinks, Ash relayed. The warmth pulsed in a specific pattern. 3 days, Ash said. It thinks. It has never done this before. Returned from a sleep this deep. It is not entirely certain of the timeline. What does it need from us during those 3 days? I said. Another exchange. This one longer. More complex. The warmth moved through several patterns I had not seen before. Contact, Ash said finally. It has been alone for several hundred years. Even during the sleep, there was awareness of being enclosed, of the world outside changing in ways it could not see or understand. It is not asking for company out of sentiment, Ash said. It is asking because the process of waking from a sleep this deep requires anchoring to the current reality. Without that anchor, the dreams continue. The anchor is contact, someone talking to it, giving it current reality to replace the forest it keeps dreaming about. Yes, Ash said, someone talking to it, telling it what the world is like now, giving it current information to replace the forest it keeps dreaming about. I stood in front of that door for a moment and thought about a thing that had gone to sleep in an open forest several hundred years ago, that had woken up, in whatever partial way this counted as waking, inside a pocket dimension, in a changed world, surrounded by creatures that could not speak to it and hunters that died trying to reach it. We will stay, I said. Kael, Dane said. Not a warning, more like he needed to understand. We are authorized for extraction. 3 days is what it needs, I said. Director Vel's mandate was stabilization. This is stabilization. We stay. We talk to it. The dungeon collapses cleanly. How we stabilize it? We stay and we talk to it for 3 days and it wakes up properly and the dungeon collapses cleanly and nobody dies. Silence. Then Lyrian spoke. I will relay the request to Director Vale. she said. From here. She held up a communication device. We have contact through 4-3. I can get a message out. I need the restricted material clause honored regardless of how long this takes. I said. I will note that in the request, she said. Her tone said she had already decided to honor it before I asked. She moved to make the call. Dane looked at me, then at the door, then at my bag, where Ash had returned and curled up with those yellow eyes open and watchful. My bag, where Ash had returned while we talked, curled up against the side with those yellow eyes open and watchful. The creature, Dane said to Ash. It has been doing this the whole time, since before you came to Van Thorn, reaching into dungeon networks, feeding you information. Yes, I said, and the authority knows, he said. Director Vale knows, I said. She has known since the first meeting. He was quiet for a moment, processing. The F-rank evaluation, he said slowly. The crystal could not read what you had. Correct, I said. He thought about that. I watched him think, the framework reorganizing around new information. Like my father at that dinner table, but faster and without the personal grief. The same process my father had gone through at that dinner table, except Dane was doing it faster and without the personal investment. How many dungeons? He said. Currently, Ash has active contact with somewhere between 40 and 60. I said. The number fluctuates based on which boundary creatures are in range. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, that is the most dangerous information advantage I have ever heard of in my career. And you are 18. Yes, I said. And your family ranked you out, he said. My father gave me 3 months to find civilian work. I said. I found some. Dane looked at me for another moment. Then he sat down against the far wall, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. Not sleeping, thinking. The way people think when they have been handed something that requires a full recalibration and they are doing the courtesy of taking it seriously. Ren crouched beside me, quiet. She had been quiet most of the mission, which I was learning meant she was paying more attention than anyone who was talking. The creature across the door, Ren said, very low. Has it told you what it is? What kind of being? Not directly, I said. The name seems descriptive, not a species. Not directly, I said. The boundary creature called it the first sleeper. That seems to be descriptive rather than a species name. In the old records, Ren said. She paused, like she was deciding whether to continue. There are references to entities that predate the dungeon system, pre-collapse, things that were already in the world before spatial distortion became common. Most historians classify them as mythology. Ash says the dungeon formed around it, I said, which would put its origin before the first recorded spatial collapse. Ren was quiet. How old does that make it? She said. I do not know, I said. Old enough that it went to sleep in a forest that does not exist anymore. She looked at the door, at the slow warmth pulsing through it. What forest was it? She said. Not a practical question, just a human one. I have not asked yet, I said. She nodded. Then she stood and moved back to her position. Still thinking, still watching. Lyrian returned from the far wall. Director Vale authorizes the extended operation. Authority personnel are beginning controlled creature evacuation through the upper floors. Personnel are beginning controlled evacuation of dungeon creature population through the upper floors. She says to tell you the restricted material clause stands. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. 3 days. I said to Ash. To the door. To the room. Ash relayed. The warmth pulsed once, slow and deep. Something that Ash translated without my asking. It says thank you, Ash said. I had not expected that. I sat there while something ancient thanked us for showing up, and found I had nothing adequate to say back. I sat in front of the door, and I talked. Ash relayed everything in both directions. A continuous patient translation between my language and whatever the first sleeper used as language. I told it what the world looked like now, the cities, the dungeon system, how the spatial collapses have been mapped and categorized and turned into an industry. I told it about hunters and guilds and ranking crystals. I told it about the authority and the break protocols and the reason we had come in the first place. It listened. The warmth shifted and pulsed as it processed each piece. Sometimes it asked questions through Ash. Small ones. What do the cities look like? How many people? Do forests still exist? Yes, I told it. Forests still exist. The warmth steadied when I said that. Something releasing. In the background of all of this, the evacuation of the upper floors was underway. Authority personnel with specialized containment gear moving creatures through the entry point in an organized stream. Ash monitored it through the boundary network and gave me updates. I passed relevant information to Ren, who relayed it to Director Vale. The operation was running into directions simultaneously and somehow holding together. Lyrian sat in the far corner of the room on floor 5 the entire first day. Not sleeping, not talking, watching me work, watching Ash translate, watching the door breathe. At one point, one looked over and Lyrian was writing in a small notebook. I did not ask what. Some things you leave alone and trust that they are being handled properly. By the end of the first day, the pressure readings Ren was monitoring had dropped 14%. Not dramatic, but consistent and in the right direction. It is working, Ren said. It is going to work. I said, 3 days. She nodded and did not push further. That was the thing about Ren. She let results speak. Dane had stopped questioning anything by midday. He had moved from the wall to a position closer to the door and had spent the afternoon in a silence that was no longer skeptical. Something else. Something I did not have a precise name for, but that looked like the expression of someone who has just realized the impossible is simply something they had not understood. The expression of someone who has just realized the thing they dismissed as impossible is in fact simply something they had not understood yet. The second day, the first sleeper started asking about me. Not about humans in general, about me specifically. Why was I here? What did I want from this? What would I receive in return? I was honest. I told it about the contract, the materials for Ash, the payment, the fact that this had started as a professional arrangement and become something harder to categorize. Started as a professional arrangement and had become something I was not entirely sure how to categorize anymore. The warmth shifted when I said that, a pattern I had not seen before. It finds that interesting, Ash said. Why? I said, because you told it the truth. Ash said, it expected a different answer. Most beings, it says, would have claimed pure motivation. You did not. Lying to something that has been alive longer than recorded history seemed inadvisable, I said. Ash relayed. The warmth pulsed, something that might have been amusement. It agrees with your reasoning, Ash said. Then the first sleeper asked about Ash. What Ash was, how we had found each other, how long we had been working together. I told it, the market, the chain, the 8 months in the beast shop, the F-Frank evaluation that had sent me down that street on that particular afternoon. The warmth pulled deep and held when I got to the part about the beast shop. Sustained, not intense. It is angry, Ash said, very quietly. About the shop. I said, about the chain. Ash said, about the 8 months. I looked at Ash. It was very still. Something was moving through the boundary network faster than usual. I looked at Ash. Ash was sitting very still, the way it sat when something was moving through the boundary network faster than usual. Ash, I said, I am fine. Ash said, a beat. It is speaking to me directly, not through the translation channel. What is it saying? I said. Ash was quiet for a long time. The warmth beyond the door moved in patterns I had no reference for. Complex. Sustained. Not the slow ancient rhythms of before, but something faster and more deliberate. It is apologizing, Ash said finally, very quietly, on behalf of what it calls the old world, for what the new world made of its descendants. The room was very quiet. I did not have anything to say to that. I did not think anything I could say would be adequate, so I just sat there while something ancient apologized to a small gray creature that had spent 8 months chained to a post in a market while humans walked by without hearing a word it said. And Ash sat very still and received it. By the end of the second day, the pressure readings had dropped 61%. The upper floors were fully evacuated. The middle floors were clearing. Ren reported it to Director Vale. The response came back. The operation is proceeding ahead of schedule. All external preparations for controlled collapse are in place. Standing by for your signal. Tomorrow, I told Ren. If the readings continue at this rate, tomorrow afternoon. She nodded. She had stopped being surprised by my accuracy 24 hours ago. On the morning of the third day, the first sleeper said something that was not a question and not a statement about the world and not a piece of the ongoing conversation we had been having. Ash went still when it came through. Very still. The specific stillness that meant it was working out how to translate something that did not have a direct equivalent. It says, Ash said slowly, that in the old world, there was a role for people who could hear. Not hunters, not scholars, a different function. What function? I said. Speakers, Ash said, between the world that humans could perceive and the world that was larger than human perception. They were necessary. The old world did not function well without them. I sat with that. It is saying this world is also not functioning well without them. I said. Not a question. Yes, Ash said, because the last one was for 100 years ago. I said. Yes, Ash said. I looked at the door. at the warmth that had been pulsing in those slow ancient rhythms for 3 days now. What is it asking? I said. Nothing, Ash said. It is not making a request. It is offering information. What you do with the information is your decision. I thought about the 40 dungeon networks Ash could currently reach, about the authority and the guilds and the information that moved through all of those systems always incomplete, and the information that moved through all of those systems imperfectly, incompletely, always missing the layer that existed below human perception. I thought about what it would mean to actually build something around this, not just sell individual pieces of intelligence, something structural, something that lasted. I thought about my father's face at the dinner table. I thought about a resonance crystal printing F. Tell it I understand, I said. Ash relayed. The warmth beyond the door pulsed once slow deep. The rhythm of something that has said what it needed to say and is now ready for what comes next. It is ready, Ash said. Tell it I stopped. Start it again. Tell it the forest still exists. Tell it there are a lot of them. Tell it the world it is waking up into still has things worth being awake for. Ash relayed. The warmth held for a long moment. Then it began to change, not withdrawing, but expanding, the way warmth spreads from something cold beginning finally to warm. Not withdrawing, expanding slowly. The way warmth spreads outward from something that has been cold for a very long time and is finally, carefully, beginning to warm again. The door, the thing that had been a door, began to lose its definition at the edges. The material that was not stone and not metal and had no name began to dissolve at the boundary between it and the air. Not violently, not dramatically, the way ice thaws when the temperature rises, gradually and then completely. The edges of the door began to lose their definition in the air. The dungeon is collapsing, Ren said. Her voice was steady, controlled. I have got structural readings. It is going from the bottom up. Floors 5 to 423. Moving slowly. We need to go, Lyrian said. She was already on her feet. Not urgent, slow collapse. We have time. But we go now. I did not move immediately. I looked at the space where the door had been, at the warmth that was now spreading into the room itself, filling it. And I saw, for just a moment, something that I do not have adequate words for. A shape in the warmth large old. Not human, not animal, not anything that fit any category one had. Looking at me with the kind of attention that comes from something that has been awake for a very long time and is fully present in a way that most things are not. It looked at Ash, then back at me, then it was gone. Not abruptly, just gone the way fog goes when the sun comes up. Gradually, and then completely. The warmth remained for a moment, then it began to fade. Kael, Lyrian said from behind me. Coming, I said, and I'm in it. But I took one more moment first. We moved fast back through the collapsing dungeon. Floor 5 dissolving behind us. For already unstable. Ren called the pace. Lyrian kept point. Dane covered the rear with an efficiency that had dropped all pretense of evaluating me and become simply doing the job. Floor 3 was empty. The evacuation had cleared it completely. Our footsteps echoed in corridors that were beginning to soften at the edges, stone becoming something more like memory than matter. Floor 2. Still intact, but the walls had a quality now like they were remembering how to be solid rather than actually being solid. Floor 1. The main entrance corridor. Authority personnel visible ahead through the exit, shouting to us to move, to move. The external readings were showing full collapse imminent. We came out into gray afternoon light at a run, all 4 of us. And behind us the dungeon entrance sealed itself and then was not there. The spatial pocket closed. The crack in the world's surface that had been a dungeon entrance for 6 months became simply ground. We stood on that ground and breathed, the 4 of us, and Ash in my bag, very still, very quiet, doing whatever Ash did after something like that had passed through it. Director Vale was 30 meters away with a team of authority personnel and monitoring equipment. She walked toward us when we emerged. Her expression was the same as always, controlled, assessing, but her eyes were doing something different. Collapse confirmed, she said. Control. No break, full structural dissolution. Timeline from your signal to complete closure, 18 minutes. Good, I said. I was still catching my breath. The readings we got during your time on floor 5, she said. The pressure signature on day 2. There was a secondary pattern embedded in it that our equipment has not seen before. She paused. Something was communicating outward through the structure. Not the brake pressure. Something deliberate. Yes, I said. She looked at me steadily. What exactly was in the dungeon? She said. I thought carefully about how much of the true answer to give her right now. I thought about a thing that had gone to sleep in a forest several hundred years ago, that had apologized to a small gray creature on behalf of an old world, that had told me there was once a role for people who could hear. Something old, I said, something that is not there anymore. She held my gaze for a moment, then she nodded once. The nod of someone who has decided to accept the answer they have been given without pushing further. For now, the restricted material will be in my office by tomorrow morning, she said. The rest of your payment process is this evening. Thank you, I said. She started to turn, then stop. Kael, she said. I waited. The Dungeon Authority has 17 active Tier 5 and above dungeons under Breakwatch in this region. The methodology you use here, the real-time intelligence, the ability to communicate with internal populations rather than monitor from outside. I want to discuss a formal arrangement. Internal populations rather than simply monitoring them from outside. I would like to discuss a formal consulting arrangement. Not exclusive, structured. I looked at her. She looked back. Send me the terms. I said, I will review them. She nodded and walked back to her team. I stood on the ground where a dungeon had been and looked out at the city and thought about 17 dungeons. About 40 plus active boundary networks. About what it might mean to actually build something around what Ash and I could do together. Not just individual intelligence sales. Something structural. Something that lasted. Ash climbed out of the bag while I was thinking. Walked to the edge of the ground. Sat down. Looked out at the city the same direction I was looking. The restricted material. It said, tomorrow morning. I said. It was quiet. What does it do? Dane said. He had walked up behind me at some point. He was looking at Ash. When it evolves, what changes? I do not know exactly. I said. Ash told me the range increases. The depth of contact. More dungeons. Clearer signal. Dane thought about that. More information, he said. More information, I said. He was quiet for a moment. The guild I work with, he said carefully. Iron Path. You have an existing arrangement with them. I do, I said. Van Thorn approached you because Iron Path's success rate spiked after they started using your information, he said. Other guilds noticed. There are going to be others after Van Thorn. I know, I said. You are going to need infrastructure, he said. Systems.people. You cannot do this alone and maintain the kind of response time that makes the information valuable. I looked at him. He was watching Ash. His expression was the one he had been wearing since midday yesterday. The one that came from something being recalibrated. Are you offering something? I said. I am pointing something out, he said carefully. What you do next with it is your decision. He walked back toward the authority team without another word. I watched him go and thought about what he had said and what he had very carefully not said along with it. Ren had not moved. She was still standing where we had come out of the collapsed entrance, looking at the ground where the dungeon had been. I walked over, stood next to her. We both looked at the unremarkable patch of earth for a moment. The forest it was dreaming about, she said. Yes. I said. Did you ever find out which one it was? She said. No. I said. She nodded. Quiet. I think, she said carefully. That was the most extraordinary thing I have encountered in 22 years of dungeon work. She said it the way someone states a practical fact they have assessed and confirmed. Yes, I said. Thank you for letting us be part of it, she said. I did not know what to do with that, so I just said, thank you for not making it harder than it had to be. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Then she walked away. I stood where I was for a moment before realizing I was staring after her and stopped doing that. Lyrian was the last. She had been standing slightly apart from all of it, doing what she always did, which was watch without participating until she had something worth saying. She came over when the others had gone, looked at me for a moment, then at Ash, then back at me. She had the manner of someone who had been waiting until the right moment. The restricted archive reference, she said. Primordial tone. There is more in there than just the name. Descriptions of what speakers did. Historically. You mentioned that, I said. I can get you access to the full record, she said. It requires S-rank clearance. I have that. I looked at her. She looked back. Those unusual silver eyes. Why? I said. Because the last speaker died 400 years ago and whatever they did when they were alive appears to have mattered quite a bit, she said. And because you are clearly going to need to know what you are doing before you do too much more of it. Ash made a sound from beside my feet. The specific sound that meant she has a point. I am aware it has a point, I said. Ash made a different sound. The one that meant I was not talking to you. I looked down. Ash was looking at Lyrian. Lyrian looked at Ash for a moment. Then she crouched down to eye level. The same way I had the first time. outside the beast shop in the market. "Hello," she said. "Not to me." Ash regarded her for a long, steady moment with those flat yellow eyes. Then it said something. "Not to me," directly to her, in the frequency that was not words. She could not hear it, obviously, but she held the contact anyway. "It says you have good eyes," I said. Something flickered in her expression. "Brief. Tell it thank you," she said. "It already knows," I said. She stood, looked at me steadily. "The archive access," she said. "When you are ready." Then she walked back unhurried, like it was already settled. Then she walked back to the authority team, unhurried, like everything that had just happened was a thing she had already filed, underhandled, and moved on from. I stood on the ground where a dungeon had been and looked at the city and thought about my father's face and a ranking crystal and a chain in a market and a door that breathed. And a ranking crystal and a chain in a market and a door that was not a door. And something ancient waking up in a world it did not recognize. I thought about 17 dungeons under Breakwatch. I thought about what it meant that there had once been speakers and now there were not, and what the world might have been like in the gap. I thought about Ash, who had spent 8 months in a beast shop and was going to wake up tomorrow with a restricted material and a range of contact neither of us fully understood yet. A restricted evolution material in its system and a range of contact that neither of us fully understood yet. "Frank," I thought. "Sure." I looked down at Ash. "Ready to go home," I said. "The material first," Ash said. "The material is tomorrow morning," I said. "Then I am ready to go home," Ash said. I picked it up, held it the way I had learned to, firmly enough to be secure, loosely enough to be comfortable. It settled against my chest with the weight of something that trusted where it was. We walked back toward the city, into whatever came next. I did not know exactly what that was, but for the first time since the resonance crystal had printed F on my evaluation certificate and my father had looked at me like a stranger, I was not walking toward it alone. That, it turned out, made all the difference. The restricted material arrived at 7 in the morning. Director Vell's assistant delivered it personally. A small sealed container, no larger than a fist, marked with the authority's highest classification level. I signed for it in the doorway in the clothes I had slept in. The assistant looked at me, then at Ash. I signed for it in the doorway of my apartment in the clothes I had slept in. The assistant looked at me, then at Ash sitting on my shoulder, then at the container. He did not say anything. He handed it over and left. I closed the door. Ash had been very still since I signed, already aware of what was inside through the seal. I closed the door. Ash had been very still since I signed, the kind of still that meant it was already aware of what was in the container even through the seal. "This is it," I said, not a question. "Yes," Ash said. It had been sitting on my shoulder since I opened the door. Neither of us had moved from that spot. I sat down on the floor, cross-legged, the way we had sat across from each other dozens of times over the past months. I put the container between us and looked at Ash. "Are you ready?" I said. Ash looked at the container for a moment. Those yellow eyes, flat and steady as always, but with something underneath that I had learned to read as the closest Ash got to visible emotion. "I have been ready since the market," Ash said. 8 months distilled into one sentence. I opened the container and held it out between us. I opened the container. The material inside was called North Star Celestial Sand, a name that sounded like mythology and looked like it. Fine as actual sand, but luminous. Pale silver blue, moving slowly inside the container the way sand moves when water passes through it, except there was no water and no wind. I held the container out. Ash looked at it for another moment. Then it lowered its head and breathed in. The sand rose slowly, a column of pale silver blue lifting from the container toward Ash like smoke. In reverse, it entered through the breath. I watched it disappear into Ash entirely, grain by grain, unhurried. The process took approximately 4 minutes. I did not move. I did not speak. When the last grain disappeared, Ash exhaled slowly and sat very still for a long moment. Then the yellow eyes changed. Not the color, the quality, the depth of them. Something that had been present before became more present, the way a signal becomes clearer when the interference is removed. The same eyes, but with more of whatever was behind them visible through them. Ash looked at me. "Well," I said. 47 dungeons currently, Ash said. Previously it was variable between 40 and 60 depending on boundary proximity. Now it is 47 with full clarity. The signal does not fade at the edges anymore. It is consistent, and the depth is significantly further. Interior networks now, not just boundary populations. The quality of information had shifted entirely. Further, Ash said, significantly. I can reach interior networks now, not just boundary populations, the creatures deeper inside the dungeons. A pause. This changes the quality of information considerably. I sat with that for a moment. Interior networks meant real-time data from the inside of active dungeons, not just the creatures at the edges. The precision of what I could offer had just increased by an order I did not yet have numbers for. "Are you all right?" I said. Ash looked at me steadily. "I am more than I was this morning." It said that, yes. I am all right. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding until then. I let out a breath. Then I picked up my phone and sent a message to Director Vale. One line. The evolution completed successfully. Interior network access confirmed. Ready to begin formal arrangement discussions. Her response came back in 11 minutes. She did not work slowly. "Come in at 2. I put the phone down. Looked at Ash. "We have a few hours," I said. "Then we should eat," Ash said. "You have not eaten since yesterday." It was right. I had not eaten since yesterday. I got up and made breakfast and ate at the table while Ash sat on the windowsill and processed 47 interior networks in silence. Processed whatever was coming through 47 interior dungeon networks simultaneously and did not tell me any of it yet because it was still sorting. This was the thing about working with Ash that nobody else would ever fully understand. The information was always there. Ash was always receiving. The skill was in knowing what to surface and when and how to present it so it was useful, rather than overwhelming. I was still learning that. Ash was patient about it. I ate my breakfast and thought about the meeting with Vale and what I wanted out of the formal arrangement. Not just money. That was simple. The structure mattered. What authority I had. What I could and could not be directed to do. What happened to the information after I gave it? Who else had access? I wrote notes. Ash occasionally said something from the windowsill without looking away from the street below. "The tier for Dungeon Northeast," it said at one point. "There is unusual pressure distribution in the upper floors. Not break risk, but worth noting. Something is establishing territory near the entrance that has not been there before." "New creature," I said. "Migrant from a collapsed dungeon further north," Ash said. "Looking for a new anchor point. The interior population has not yet decided whether to accept it. How long before it resolves?" I said. 3 to 5 days, Ash said. "Either it integrates or it is forced out. If it is forced out, it will move again. I will track." "Good," I said. I wrote it down. Then I looked at the notes I had been making about the Vale meeting and thought about what Dane had said the day before. "You are going to need infrastructure.systems.people. You cannot do this alone." He was right. I had known he was right when he said it. I had been thinking about it in the hours since. The problem with building infrastructure was that it required trust. Trust required people. And people had a complicated relationship with things they could not verify except through results. In my experience, had a complicated relationship with something they did not fully understand and could not verify, except through results. The 3 hunters knew now. Dane, Ren, Lyrian. They had seen the operation from the inside. That was 3 people. That was a start. I finished my notes, cleaned up breakfast, got dressed in something that was not the clothes I had slept in. Ash dropped from the windowsill to my shoulder as I was heading for the door. "Northeast Dungeon," it said. "I know," I said. I wrote it down. "The Tier 6 east of the city," it said. I stopped. "The Tier 6 collapsed yesterday," I said. "Yes," Ash said, "but the spatial residue is still there. The first sleeper left a signature in the space where the dungeon was. The boundary creatures nearby are behaving differently than before." Space where the dungeon was. "The boundary creatures near the area are behaving differently than they were before." "Differently how?" I said. Ash was quiet for a moment. "Calmer," it said. "Something in the residue is having a stabilizing effect on the surrounding dungeon populations. The creatures near the collapse site are showing significantly reduced agitation compared to normal baseline." I stood in my doorway and thought about that. About something ancient waking up and walking out through a collapsed dungeon into a world it did not recognize. About what it left behind. "Is it still in the area?" I said. "No," Ash said. "Residue only. It has moved on. But wherever it has gone, the populations near the location will likely experience the same effect." "No," Ash said. "The signature is residue only. It has moved on." A pause. "But wherever it has gone, the populations near the location will likely experience the same effect. A stabilizing presence," I said. "Something like that," Ash said. I stood in my doorway and thought about what an ancient thing walking through a changed world might leave behind it as it went. I thought about what the first sleeper had said about speakers, about the role they had played in the old world, about the world not functioning well without them, about what it might mean that one of the things the old world had contained was now awake and moving through the new one. With no map, no context, an ancient thing learning to change world in real time. I filed that away. It was not something I could address today, but it was something I would need to think about. We walked to the authority building. Director Vell's office at 2 in the afternoon looked exactly like it had every other time. I had been in it. She was already at her desk when I arrived. The contract draft was already printed. I took the chair across from her desk. Ash settled on my shoulder. Vale looked at Ash the way she always did, acknowledging its presence without making it a point of conversation. I read the contract carefully. She let me. She had not gotten to her position by rushing people who were reading things she needed them to sign. The terms were structured around 17 priority dungeons, the ones currently under Breakwatch. Retainer plus per incident fees. Non-exclusive, which I had expected her to resist, and she had apparently decided not to. My information, my methodology, and my source remained classified and proprietary. The authority got the intelligence, but not the method. That last point was the one I had expected to fight over. She had already conceded it. You anticipated my conditions. I said. You anticipated my needs. She said. The operation yesterday produced a controlled collapse of a tier 6 dungeon with 0 casualties and no break event. That has never happened before. I am not in a position to be difficult about methodology. The results are in the terms. She said it plainly, without ceremony, and moved on. I looked at the payment schedule, looked at the access clauses, looked at the escalation protocol that defined what happened if a priority dungeon moved from watch status to imminent break status. The escalation protocol. I said, if a dungeon goes imminent, I need full operational authority on approach strategy, not advisory. Full. She considered that, within reason. She said, your approach calls in combat situations still defer to the assigned hunter team. Agreed, I said, but on entry timing, route selection, communication priorities, those are mine. Those are yours, she said. I signed. She countersigned, set the copies aside. Then she looked at me with the expression she wore when she was going to say something that was not in the contract. The tier for Northeast, she said. I looked at her. You already know about it, I said. Our monitoring picked up an anomaly this morning, she said. Give me the days first, I said. Our perimeter monitoring picked up an anomaly this morning, she said. Something establishing at the entrance level. We were going to run a standard assessment. Give me the days first, I said. It is a migration situation from a northern collapse. The interior population is deciding whether to integrate the newcomer. If they integrate, the dungeon stabilizes on its own. If they do not, I can tell you before it becomes a problem. She studied me for a moment. 2 days, she said. I nodded that we understood each other. That was the thing about Vale. She was very good at updating her framework when the evidence required it. She had looked at a 19-year-old F-rank with a dungeon creature on his shoulder and a contract with 2 clients, and she had decided to evaluate the results rather than the presentation. I respected that. I respected it enough to make sure the results continued to justify the evaluation. We left the office with a signed contract and a shared understanding of what came next. I left her office at 3:15 with a signed contract and the beginning of something that felt, for the first time, like a real structure rather than an improvised chain of individual transactions. Ash was quiet on the walk back, not the processing quiet, the other kind, the first sleeper, Ash said eventually. Yes, I said, I have been expecting this. It apologized to me, Ash said, on behalf of the old world, for what the new world made of its descendants. I know, I said. I was there. I have been thinking about what that means, Ash said. An ancient thing that has no responsibility for what happened. Apologizing for it anyway, because it was from the world and the harm came from that world's collapse. Yes, I said. I did not know what to do with that at the time, Ash said. I am still not certain I do. I walked for a moment without responding. We were passing through the market district, the same route I had taken the day of my evaluation. Certificate stuffed in my jacket, looking at the ground. The same alley on the left, the same beast shop, different creatures in the window now. I looked at it as we passed and did not slow down and did not say anything. I think, I said slowly, that some things do not require you to know what to do with them. Some things just are. You receive them. You carry them. They become part of how you move through the world. Ash was quiet. We walked through the market and neither of us spoke. Some things do not need to be said while you are walking past them. They just need to be walked past. The 8 months in that shop, I said. The chain. The people who walked past. Those are part of you now. The apology is part of you now. None of it cancels out the others. It all just exists together. We passed the alley, the beast shop. I looked at it as we went by. That is either very wise, Ash said, or very convenient reasoning. Probably both, I said. Probably, Ash said. And for just a moment, there was something in those yellow eyes that was not flat and not steady. Something warmer than usual. Brief. There and then not there. I did not comment on it. Some things you leave alone. The archive access from Lyrian came through that evening. A secure transfer to a private reader. The pre-system records the restricted sections, the full text of every reference to primordial tongue and the role of speakers that existed in the S-Rank archive. I sat at my desk and opened it. Ash settled beside me, not on the windowsill, beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. I started to read. The first records were fragmented, partial accounts from a period before the current dungeon system existed, before the spatial collapses had become regular enough to categorize, before guilds or rankings or any of the infrastructure that currently organized the relationship between humans and the world they lived in. In those records, speakers were not rare. They were a function, the same way healers or builders were functions. Something the community required and therefore produced, reliably, generation to generation. Builders or farmers were functions. Something the community required and therefore produced, reliably, generation to generation. They were the people who could hear what the rest of the population could not. Who could speak to the things that existed outside human perception? Who could carry information across the boundary between the world humans inhabited and the larger world that contained it? And they were necessary. Not in the way that useful things are necessary. In the way that load-bearing walls are necessary. The structure depended on them. I read for 2 hours. Ash read beside me, not the words, but the information shifting through the boundary network as I processed the records told it something too. Network was shifting as I processed the records, and I could tell by the quality of Ash's attention that it was receiving something from that too. The records got clearer as they approached the period 400 years ago. The last speaker's name was Sira, the same name Ash had given me months ago when I asked about the 400-year gap. A woman who lived alone in a forest and mostly talked to birds. The records were kinder to her than that description had suggested. She had not withdrawn from the role. The role had withdrawn from her. The infrastructure speakers had historically operated within. The networks, the institutional recognition of what they did, had collapsed along with everything else. The networks, the communication channels, the institutional recognition of what they did, had collapsed along with everything else in the period before the current dungeon system emerged. By the time Sira was practicing, there was no framework left. No one who understood what she was doing well enough to support it. She maintained what contact she could, alone, well enough to support it. She had maintained what contact she could, with what was available, with the understanding she had. She had talked to birds because birds were what she had access to, and she had done that every day until she died. I sat back from the reader and looked at the ceiling for a while. Ash did not say anything. It had been very still for the past 20 minutes. For 100 years, I said finally. Yes, Ash said. The whole period between Sira and now, I said. Every dungeon that broke without warning. Every hunter team that went in without knowing what was inside. Every decision made on incomplete information about things that could have been communicated directly. Yes, Ash said. Because the infrastructure collapsed, I said. Not because the ability disappeared. Not because the world stopped having things worth hearing. Just because the supporting structure fell apart and nobody rebuilt it. I sat back and looked at the ceiling. The gap was not inevitable. It was a failure of maintenance over 400 years. I thought about Director Vel's 17 dungeons. About the authorities' perimeter monitoring. Sophisticated equipment designed to detect from the outside what could have been simply asked from the inside. I thought about Dane pointing out that I needed infrastructure.systems.people, not just for the information brokerage, for something larger than that, for the thing the records were describing, the thing that had existed before and stopped existing not because it became unnecessary, but because the structure that held it was not maintained. Ash, I said. Yes, Ash said. What would you need? I said. To expand the network, not just reach, actual coordination. Multiple creatures, multiple locations, consistent structured communication. Ash was quiet for a moment. Time, it said, and trust. The boundary populations are aware of what I am. What happened with the first sleeper traveled through the network faster than I expected. Are aware of what I am. What happened with the first sleeper traveled through the network faster than I expected. The willingness to cooperate is more present than it was before. How much more present? I said. There is a creature in the Tier 3 dungeon on the western edge of the city, Ash said. It has been attempting to make contact with me for 3 days. I have not responded yet because I was not certain what to tell it. I looked at Ash. Tell it we are interested, I said. Tell it we are building something. What are we building? Ash said. I looked at the archive records still open on the rear, at Sierra's name, at the fragments of what the world had been like when there were people who could hear it properly. What the records described, I said, but updated, for the world that actually exists now. Ash looked at me, then at the city outside the window. It was considering something carefully. Ash was quiet for a long moment, those yellow eyes, deeper than they had been this morning. After the evolution, with more of whatever was behind them visible. That is a very large thing to build, Ash said. I know, I said. You are 19, Ash said. I know that too, I said. Sierra was 43 when the last of the old infrastructure collapsed around her, Ash said. She maintained what she could for the remaining 30 years of her life alone. I know, I said. You are not alone, Ash said. That stopped me. I looked at it. It was looking back at me with those steady eyes. No, I said. I am not. Then the size of the thing is less relevant than the direction. Ash said. We know the direction. I thought about a resonance crystal that had printed F and a father, who had given me 3 months. About a small gray creature in a cage in a market saying for 100 years. Months, about a small gray creature in a cage in a market. That had said first human and for 100 years. In the flat tone of something confirming a data point. About 3 hunters in a collapsed dungeon entrance. About a director who had looked at an F-rank teenager and decided to evaluate the results. About an ancient thing that had woken up in a changed world and said thank you. About Lyrian, crouching down to eye level, saying hello to something she could not hear. About all the things that had lined up from the day of the evaluation to this evening in this apartment with archive records open and 47 interior dungeon networks humming quietly. In this apartment with archive records open on the desk and 47 interior dungeon networks humming quietly through whatever Ash was. Okay, I said. Then let us start. Ash looked at me for one more moment, then it turned toward the window, toward the city outside, and it began to reach. I watched it work. The quality of its stillness when it was reaching was different from all its other stillnesses. More complete, more total, like something becoming briefly more itself than usual. The creature in the Tier 3 dungeon on the western edge, the migrant in the Tier 4 northeast. 47 interior networks now receiving not just passive broadcast, but a deliberate structured signal. Populations of 47 dungeons that were now receiving not just the passive broadcast of Ash's presence, but an active, structured, deliberate signal. We are here. We are listening. We are building something. I did not know how many of them would respond. I did not know how long it would take to build the structure. I was thinking about or whether I had understood the records correctly, or whether the world was ready for what the records described. I did not know what my father would say when he eventually found out what his F-rank son was doing. I suspected it would take him a while to find a framework large enough to contain it. I did not know when Marcus would notice, or what it would look like to him from inside his S-rank guild, from inside the infrastructure he had assumed was the whole of the world. I did not know a lot of things. What I knew was this: a resonance crystal had looked at the most important ability and for 100 years and called it nothing, and the world had organized itself around that evaluation. Guilds. Rankings. Hierarchies built on what the crystal could measure, and somewhere in the gap between what the crystal measured and what actually existed, something had been missing for a very long time. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just missing. The way a load-bearing wall is missing, slowly, and then all at once, in ways that look like other problems until someone points at the wall. I was going to be the person who pointed at the wall, and then I was going to rebuild it. F-rank. Sure. I looked at the archive records, at Sierra's name, at the 400 years of gap. Then I looked at Ash, reaching out through 47 networks in the quiet of our apartment, doing what it had been built to do in a world that had finally, accidentally, produced someone who could hear it. I picked up my phone, sent a message to Lyrian. One line: I have read the archive. When can we meet? Her response came back in 4 minutes. Tomorrow morning. I will bring the rest. I had not asked what the rest was. I suspected I would find out tomorrow, and it would change things further. I set the phone down, closed the archive, looked at the notes I had made that morning about the formal arrangement with Vale. Then I opened a new page and started writing something different. Not notes about meetings or dungeon statuses or payment structures. Something closer to what the old records had been. A document, the beginning of one. A record of what primordial tongue was. What Ash was. What speakers had been, and what this version of that role might become in a world organized around resonance crystals and dungeon rankings. And guilds. Something that, if everything went according to no plan I had yet fully formed, might eventually not be the kind of thing that only existed in restricted archives. I wrote for 2 hours. Ash came back from the reach at some point and settled beside me and did not interrupt. The city outside went through its evening rhythms. Somewhere east of us, in the space where a dungeon had been, the first sleeper's residue was settling into the ground, and something about the dungeon populations nearby was calmer than it had been before. Somewhere west, a creature in a Tier 3 dungeon had received a signal and was deciding what to do with it. Somewhere in the city, 3 hunters were recalibrating their frameworks. Somewhere in the Authority building, Director Vale was looking at 17 dungeon files with a consultant's contract in her drawer, and a recalibrated understanding of what real-time intelligence could mean. Somewhere in the city, Dane was thinking about infrastructure. Rin was thinking about ancient things and old forests. Lyrian was gathering the rest of what she had decided I needed to know. And somewhere in a changed world that did not recognize it yet, something ancient was awake for the first time in centuries, moving through it, learning it, leaving calm behind as it went. For the first time in centuries, moving through a world it was still learning, leaving behind it a residue of calm. The world was not smaller than a resonance crystal said it was. It had just been waiting for someone who could hear the parts of it that the crystal missed. Frank, I kept writing.